Story 1. Coal dust. So here I am, laying down on my stomach helpless, darkness stifling both my thoughts and cries for help. I was too deep underground now, all sound drowned out by the earth. With my last moments ahead of me, I began to reflect on how the hell I ended up in this position. I had recently received a tip-off to investigate a small town in northern England. It was a silent town that hardly manifested on any map I could get my hands on. The history of this place was as obscure as itself. The only background information I had received about the location was the construction of the power plant that was finalized in the early 80s. Before then, the town had heavily relied on coal from its coal mines in order to keep residents warm during hard, grueling winters. However, the most striking news that seemed to plague the town was the various reports of missing people and the supposed continued operation of the coal mines despite its long ago shut down. Accounts of thick, black smoke slithering from behind the gray ridges that tore along the horizon from across the fields that surrounded the town, although I could not fathom a connection between the missing persons and these reports of the redundant coal mines operations. I needed the money desperately, so I ventured into this town with the intent to investigate these suspicions of missing people thoroughly. I started with the most appropriate place my mind could conjure up. The fields. These fields stretched for miles, is snaking paths that cut straight through the tall grass and marshland, all extended towards the ridges. I had also been warned beforehand of the marshes that were highly prevalent in the fields. With this in mind, I set off on my investigation on one of the paths that had been mulched into a slick mud by various people, probably hikers. This seems like it would be an idyllic, scenic place with the right weather, of course. At this moment in time, the skies were overcast and gray. A miserable blanket draped over the sun that had seemed to have disappeared the majority. Why of my journey was uneventful. The same images of tall grass, gangly trees, and rising hills crossed my vision for hours. That was until, through random chance, I had somehow wandered onto a path that seemed to be untouched, only a subtle 1-meter wide line that I considered to be a path. I had probably wandered onto this trail whilst my mind was also wandering. With a heavy sigh, I scolded myself for not being attentive, reminding myself of the warning of the marshes the locals had given me. With a newfound caution, I prepared to turn back, which was when something very odd steamer struck my peripheral vision. It was a splash of color that prominently stood out from the generic green grass. It was sky blue. Whipping my head around to focus on the out-of-place object, I saw it was a long-sleeved shirt. The color hadn't been as vibrant as I first thought. The blue was darkened and made dull from what I predicted as years of exposure to the elements. Why was this here? It looked like it belonged to an adult and had also looked like it had been here for a while, with streaks of grime soiling the wool material it was made out of. I didn't touch it. I just stared with curiosity slowly building inside my mind. I simply lifted the lens of my camera and snapped a quick photo. The faded trail beckoned me onwards. Perhaps there were more items of interest further down this path. I continued onwards and discovered more carelessly strewn about clothing, but they did not seem to belong to the same person. All were of different sizes, some seeming to belong to younger children, and others to larger individuals. I took a photo of. All I came across, I suddenly became aware of the rapidly setting sun around me. It was getting late, and I needed to turn back. I found nothing else and began to return to my starting point. Speaking of which, where was I? I was perplexed as I glanced behind me only to notice that there was no longer a path behind me, only tall grass and line of trees appeared. Perplexed, I began to walk aimlessly, attempting to find some noticeable feature that would allow me to make my way back, but there was nothing. Around me appeared the same mundane pattern of trees, grass, and hill. Panic began to swell as the encroaching darkness crept in. With the sun dipping below the evening clouds, I decided to climb upwards to try and guide. In an idea of where I was, I reached the top of a grassy knoll and searched around me, scanning for a route out of these fields. I did find something. It wasn't a route my eyes fell upon. Dark columns of smoke rising towards the murky heavens. With disbelief infesting my mind, I began to ponder, was it really true? It couldn't be. I dismissed the thought. I had to focus on getting NG back. Then again, the columns seemed to intrigue me, and, like I said, I really needed the money. My feet began to stagger towards the columns, sluggish with fatigue. Now I was no more than a fish, caught on a fishing hook. I had taken the bait. I began to draw closer to the smoke as they loomed larger in the sky as I gradually made my way towards them, just a little closer. Not Lun. Gee, now, that was when I just noticed the noise that had been hiding amongst the background chorus of chirping birds and rustling autumn leaves. It was subtle, yet it grew louder and louder as my weary steps came ever closer to the smoke. It was a low rumble. My mind immediately jumped to the idea that this was the mines in operation. Yet I knew this was impossible, for they had been shut down. For a long time, tucking this thought in the back of my head, I continued going towards the black smoke. I had been traversing the fields for hours, with no change of scenery to bless my eyes. It was the same grass everywhere. That was until I clicked onto an abrupt change in the land. The green terrain withered away into an asphalt-colored landscape. I had reached my destination, the former coal pits of flat land stretched out in front of me. I jogged to the edge of this flat wasteland only to observe a large crater with openings in the side. It was obvious what this was. I had also just realized that the smoke had ceased, as did the rumble. Bizarre. I had the idea of searching one of the mine shafts. Looking back on it now, it was a foolish idea, yet I still followed through with my idiotic plan. Cautiously, I made my way down the side of this crater towards one of the openings. It was obscured by thorns and vegetation and barely visible. I decided to crawl through a barely noticeable gap in this wall of vegetation. With great effort, I pushed my body through and came out the other side in pitch blackness, covered in scratches and dirt. Tapping into my resourceful side, I illuminated the place with my camera flash. At the very least, it would give me a concept of where I was. Raising my camera, I clicked the button, and the bright flash covered every inch of the shaft it was now in. It revealed to me ashen gray walls supported by wooden beams that had, surprisingly for their age, not been rotted. In fact, they appeared new, as if somebody was still maintaining them. But how could this be possible? Searching the walls with my hands, I clawed my way around the tunnel, clumsily finding my way deeper and deeper. but as I got deeper a smell began to intestate the area, becoming more pungent as I descended. It became so strong that I began to gag heavily. Almost vomiting, I realized that it smelled like something dead. My feet reached level ground, and the descent had abruptly come to an end. Raising my camera once more, I activated the flash. I could have turned back then, and now I dearly wished I did. I had discovered here the missing people went. I saw piles of corpses stacked on top of one another. Their clothes were torn and shredded. They were dragged down here. This was made evident by the scratches and cuts visible on their skin. An incinerator was next to this horrifying sight. Reaching out with reluctant hands, I touched its surface. I immediately leapt backwards as I discovered it was hot. The source of the smell had also been discovered along with the bodies. Tears welled up in my eyes and stung as the smell intensified. The smell of rot, the coal dust. My fingers made contact with countless times. It wasn't coal dust blaring at my shaking hands. I found that they were covered in not coal, but ashes from burnt bodies. I always found it odd how I discovered not a single lump of coal. Sure, it was abandoned long ago, but surely that doesn't mean the coal source had run dry. There should be at least some trace of coal here, but no, there was nothing, only coal dust lay here. That was when the realization struck me like a hammer to anvil, sending sparks of horror in my mind. There was never any coal. I now knew how the town was kept warm during the winter, and the thought sickened me. The locals were all deceived and given power. Meanwhile, their own kind burned down here. Now I moved on to the next thought that occupied my head. It was still in operation. It was too late when I came to this revelation, and blinded by my shock, I had not heard the creeping footsteps behind me. However, I did hear the words that froze the blood in my veins. More fuel for the fire. Hey, story 2. My doorbell keeps ringing and I am the only one that can hear it. So I've lived with my parents in the same house for over 20 years. Nothing exciting really, just the me little neighborhood they raised me and my sisters in. Sometimes it's nice. I know every back road and where to find whatever I'm looking for, though it can be a pain in the ass at times. You notice who's moved on to bigger and better things, and who's still stuck waiting for opportunities. I'm sure you can all tell that I fit the latter. After my older sister moved across the country to go to college, the house grew quiet. It was just my parents and I, and they didn't have much to say to me. I'm in my late 20s, not interested in racking up a debt for an education, have no car, and in all honesty, I'm not really sure what my main goals in life are. I guess the backstory isn't really needed to push this along, but I figured I'd just fill you all in. My sleep schedule is messed up due to binging Netflix and having nothing to fill my days. I wake up around 5 p.m. and kind of just let my time drift by, which I didn't mind at all until a few weeks ago. Now my parents' house has 2 living rooms, and with my siblings all off doing their own things, they pretty much gifted half the house to me. One day I was sitting, ass planted firmly in the couch, when the doorbell rang. The front door was just outside of my parents' living room, so I figured one of them would answer it. They were rarely ever anywhere else. You see, my parents were both retired and spent their days how I spend mine, with their butts on a couch watching their favorite shows. The only time they ever left was when they would go upstairs to sleep. A few minutes passed before the bell rang again. I paused my show and walked over to the door. As I walked, I passed the small opening leading into my parents' living room. I stopped when I saw them both cutely staring at the television. Squinting with slight confusion, I asked them if they heard the doorbell. They both assured me that they didn't hear anything. I found this to be odd, considering the door was less than 4 feet from them, but I shrugged it off. I opened the door, and what I saw made me smile a bit. A tall man wearing a lovely green jacket with expensive-looking polished gold buttons lining its left side, a nicely tucked black turtleneck sweater, brown khakis, freshly polished black dress shoes, and a bright red toffet. Writing it all down here doesn't really do it justice, because I can imagine how much that clashes in your heads, but it worked quite well on this man. I answered with an awkward smile and a hello. He took off his hat and spun it as he bowed. "Hello, darling," he said, still bowing. I leaned back and called for my father. I wasn't exactly scared. I just assumed he was there to see my home or dad. I would soon find out that I was wrong. Once my father walked over and asked me what I needed, I gestured to the man and asked if he was a friend. My father asked me what I was talking about. I looked back at the man and then to my father. The man in the green jacket. Who else? My father was never one for jokes. He rolled his eyes and walked back over to the couch, scolding me as he did so. My heart began to pound, and I turned back to the man on my doorstep. The fact that my dad didn't joke around threw the idea of him fucking with me out the window. I stared for a few moments before the man spoke again. "What's wrong, kid?" I slowly shut the door and walked back into my living room. I wasn't scared of the man per se, more so the idea that I was going or had gone insane. A few minutes passed and the doorbell rang. Again, I just sat on my couch in deep thought. That damn bell rang every minute for the next few hours, and no one could hear a thing except Emmy. I barely got a wink of sleep that night, but even so, the next morning I told myself that the entire thing was just a weird dream. That is until I hear the doorbell ring again. I peeked into my parents' living room and noticed that they were again both sitting on the couch. I looked through the peephole, and there he was, the same man with the green coat. Okay, you got me. I am freaking out, and it's not funny anymore. I leaned against the wall and folded my arms, staring at my parents with slight anxiety. My dad paused his show and looked at me confused. "What are you talking about, sweetie?" My heart sank and tears filled my eyes. "Calm down. What's going on?" My dad stood up and embraced me, begging me to calm down and speak. I told him that everything was fine and I just needed some air. I grabbed a jacket and exhaled sharply before I opened the front door. "Hello again, darling," a voice spoke. My back was still turned as I exited the house, but I knew who it was. "Who are you?" The man giggled and clapped his hands. "I'm no one. My dear, I know this whole thing sounds stupid. Why did I go outside? Why didn't I explain it to my parents? I don't really know the answer to those questions. I wasn't compelled by any magical force or anything like that. I don't know." I stared at the man for a few moments. His wrinkled face was pushed into a smile, and his baby blue eyes reflected the sun as he stood there unblinking. Why can't they hear the doorbell or see you? He poked my forehead with a cane that he hadn't had before I asked the question, and smiled. Because I'm not here for them, darling. I was a little upset with myself at first. Out of all the hallucinations my brain could have manifested as it slipped into insanity, this was the best it had. A frail, wrinkled man in a weird suit. I chuckled slightly. You're here for me, then? Is that it? Bingo. My hands shook with anxiety, and I felt a lump in my throat. What do you want with me? I can't say just come with me and find out. He gestured to the street and smiled. I didn't feel safe, and without saying a word I spun around and ran inside my house, slamming the door shut behind me. I then ran into my room and locked the door, crawled under my blanket, and cried. The doorbell rang for hours. Occasionally I would peek through my blinds, and he'd make eye contact with me, waving and smiling as he continuously pressed the doorbell. After a while I couldn't take the ringing. I slid open my window and screamed at him, "Stop pressing the fucking doorbell." He smiled right at me and kept pressing it. "It's 3 in the morning. What the fuck do you want from me?" He smiled again and placed his arm at his side. "I just want you to come with me, dear." "And where would we be going?" "I sure would hate to spoil the surprise. Why not just join me, H?" He reached his hand toward me and stood silently on my doorstep smiling. I was beyond mad, or was it scared? Whatever I was feeling wasn't good. Something appeared on my doorstep and refuses to leave unless I go with him to Hootie. He hell knows where. I've had it. I ran out of my room and into my garage. I grabbed my dad's hammer from his workbench and threw open the front door. "Are you coming?" he asked as I jumped onto the porch. I swung the hammer at him, but it just phased right through him. The force of the spun me around, and I landed on my ass. "Be careful, my dear. That can be dangerous," he began lowing and wiped his nose as he stared at me. I got up and began striking the doorbell with the hammer repeatedly, refusing to stop until finally my father ran out and restrained me. The man watched with a smile as I fought with my father. I didn't give up. I kept struggling, taking any shot I could to strike that damn bell. Finally, my dad was able to pull me back inside and set me on the couch. "Would you like to explain just what the fuck is going on, young lady?" I pulled my knees to my chest and sobbed. I didn't know what to say to him, so I just told him the truth. He listened without interrupting and nodded with understanding. When I was finished, he scratched his head and hugged me. I stayed at a mental hospital for the next 2 weeks, explaining to psychologists and counselors the same story over and over again. None of them believed me, but they were extremely comforting and nice about it. Was I supposed to be mad at them? I didn't mind one bit, because I slept like a baby. You know what wasn't connected to my room? A doorbell. I've since been released and am currently back at my parents' house. I feel terrible for them because they an awesome support group and just want to see me get better. It's just that last night the doorbell started ringing again, and no one can hear it but me. Sometimes I just stare through the peephole and I know he knows I'm there. He looks right into it and smiles at me, chuckling as he speaks. "Come with me. Everything will be okay." It's been 16 hours and the bell hasn't stopped once. Maybe if I go with him it won't be so bad. Story 3. Cheap perfume and watermelon shampoo. My name is Georgina Adams. I'm 28 years old. In February, I'll be 29. I live alone in a spacious apartment in Rouen. I am perfect, but I haven't always been so. When I was a child, I lived in a little town in England called Chelsea. I was called ugly by the other children in school. Sometimes they would throw stones at me. Sometimes they would wrestle me to the ground and pull up my shirt so all the children could see my flabby, white stomach and my stretch mark. As in class, they cut my hair with a pair of scissors because it was long and flaxen-colored and frizzy, and that offended them. Amelia Doherty was my worst tormentor in school, and the self-mount. The scars across both sides of my upper arms bear witness to this. Now, I am no longer fat or ugly. One model for La Depini in Paris. One day I'm going to be an actress. I eat a strict but balanced diet and have a regimented exercise routine. Every morning I wake up at 5 a.m., I tie my hair up and I go running. It's usually light by the time I get home and I can hear bird song. I eat a half a pink grapefruit and drink a cup of warm lemon water. I rinse my face, I wax my pores, I use an intensive face wash to get rid of any impurities. Then I use a vitamin-enriched gel while I shower. I then apply a thin layer of all-balancing moisturizer to my skin. Before I leave the house, I apply a light spray of mineral mist to my face and neck. I don't sleep in. I did this only hence, and I could feel the impurities in my skin. I could feel the bacteria in every crevice. I could smell the oil and the grease. Every night I apply a cooling charcoal face mask before I go to bed and wash my face again. Before I sleep, I apply the nighttime gel that prevents spots. I like this product the most because it stings. I imagine the impurities burning to death for their sins. During the day, I take a witch hazel cleansing face cloth from my handbag and wipe my face. If there is too much brown residue on the cloth, I have to chastise myself. I wear a hair tie around my wrist and I twang it every time this happens. I remember when Rory Hathwaite used to sit behind me in art and flick elastic pans at me. It enters my brain every time I punish myself. One Sunday, while I was sitting on my balcony drinking tea, I thought I saw Amelia Doherty climbing out of a little mustard-colored car in the street below and walking into my apartment block, carrying a brown suitcase. Washington is almost certain. I ran inside and carefully opened my apartment door. I could hear footsteps below, followed by the metallic click of a lock and the yawn of an opening apartment door. Mademoiselle Adams, caveat, came man's voice from behind me. I gasped as I turned my head, and then gasped again when I heard the door below me abruptly shut, followed by a muffled locking sound from within the apartment room. Oui, je suis, I reply, feigning a smile to the man who I quickly recognized as my handsome neighbor, Monsieur Renaud. He had just left his apartment for work and was carrying a briefcase and a navy jacket. I collected myself and retreated back into my apartment. I later gleaned from another neighbor, Camille, that the resident below was a Mademoiselle D. en Barbier, and she taught fine art. This put my mind at ease, yet every time I saw Barbier, I could not help but take a second glance. She was a precise replica of Amelia Doherty, a spitting image of waxen skin and raven black hair. It was when I walked past Mo Barbier's apartment door later that afternoon that I first smelt it. Amelia Doherty used to wear cheap perfume, and she would wash her hair with a shampoo that reminded me of the watermelon sorbet that they used to sell at the little ice cream shop in Chelsea. I remember first noticing this when she pushed me up against the wall on the second day of my third year of senior school. She faced me, her perfect little nose almost touching mine, and told me I was, as the French say, and gros, stupid évêque. Now, as I descend the tiled steps and walk down the corridor past Mo Barbier's apartment door, I can smell that same tacky, cheap perfume and that watermelon shampoo. Perhaps it was Amelia, and she had followed me to France to ruin my life again, to destroy me, to remind me that I'm worthless. I came to Rouen to forget that. The next morning I decided to walk past Mo Barbier's apartment door again, just to be sure. I am not a lunatic. At first, all I could smell was the musty walls and the aroma of sweet pastries filtering through an open window in the passageway. Then, as I drew closer, the smell hit me with such potency that I stopped walking and dropped my shopping bag. I turned to Mo Barbier's door. It was pure white with a little black spy-hole, and several inches from the top. I wondered if she was looking through it right there and then watching me, delighting in my horror. Another door opened, and Camille stepped out, fumbling through her handy bag for her keys. I asked her if she could smell it, too. She inhaled deeply, and with a smile she told me that all she could smell were croissants. Then she hurried down the stairs and out of the front door. There were only two possible conclusions to this incident. I was a lunatic, or Camille was lying to me. Why would she lie? My question was answered the following morning. I opened the doors of my little balcony and was met with the voices of two women talking in balcony below. The first voice I recognized to be Camille's, and the second could be none other than Mo Barbier Wattower. Oh, I remind you, lived directly below me. They were talking like they were best friends. I couldn't fully decipher what they were saying, but when I heard Camille say my name, my heart stopped. She had betrayed me. Amelia had discovered my happiness and employed Camille to help her thwart it. I always knew Camille secretly harbored envy towards me since she found I'd resigned at C.F. Burton to model clothes in Paris. Reader, I know this sounds like lunacy, but it actually makes perfect sense. Amelia did the very same thing when we left primary school. She took away my best friend, Carolyn, and turned her against me. Cigarette smoke began to rise from the balcony below, and with it the unmistakable smell of cheap perfume and watermelon shampoo. I shut the doors quickly and ran to the other side of the apartment. Of course, they were using the fragrance as a means to contaminate me. Camille must have told her that my skin and my hair are my greatest assets, and so she is going to destroy them with these sickly chemicals. I locked every door and window and stuffed every crevice with tissues. I did not leave the house that day. I laid awake at night thinking about Amelia. I heard jovial voices from outside. One of them was Mo Barbier, and the other was a man's voice. I sat up in my bed when I realized that it was Mr. Renault. Tears rolled down my cheeks. She must have discovered my feelings towards him and has turned his mind too. It must be the smell that's doing it. Perhaps that's why they can't smell it. I heard them both break into laughter as I thought of this. They can hear me. Suddenly, I imagined my perfect little apartment block was a layer of perfect alabaster skin. Each window was a pore, and the window of Moldion Barbier's apartment was a blackhead, an ugly, pulsating blackhead. It needed removing. It needed lancing. I needed to cleanse this apartment of impurities. Washington S. hit with a sudden wave of nausea, and I ran to the bathroom. I could smell the perfume and shampoo in my own apartment now. In my own room, I raised the back of my hand to my nose. It was on my skin and my clothes. The smell was so powerful it was making my nostrils burn. I gagged and I balked into the toilet. That's where I fell asleep. Shortly after 3 a.m. I slept through my alarm for the first time in 3 years. Because I'm pathetic and lazy, stupid Georgina, stupid, fat, ugly, pointless Georgina, I said, twang the hair tie until my wrist is as pink as the sunrise over La Riviere's scene. Do not worry, reader. I did manage to remove the blackhead out of its pore. I cut it out bit by bit. I cut away the black hair, the vicious tongue, the perfect little nose, every single finger that used to scratch my cheeks until they bled. I carried the fragmented little comedo to the canal, and then rewarded myself with a cigarette as I drove back home. My apartment block is clean once more, and so am I. What more, the smell completely disappeared. That night, when I let the hot water from the shower wash over me, I was happy for the first time in years. I was euphoric. I was clean. As I watched the red water fade to pink as it spiraled down the plug hole, I smiled. Then I massaged a deep cleansing body lotion into my torso. My name is Georgina Adams. I'm 28 years old. In February I'll be 29. I live alone in a spacious apartment in Rouen. I am perfect. Story 4. A lonely machine. Roger glanced around. The desert once more. Nothing but the cloudless sky and the sand scattering in the wind, with a few cacti dotted around the landscape. With nothing else to do, he checked his magazine, already knowing how many bullets he had full. Adjusting his helmet, Roger sighed and turned back to face Elliot. What a waste of time. It's hot as hell in this uniform. I fucking hate being deployed. In the desert, the sand's more of a threat than anything I've seen so far. Roger picked up a handful of the yellowish dust, letting it slip between his gloved fingers. Yeah, if there were any all threats out here, I can't remember the last time we actually saw anything, Elliot replied, staring off into the horizon, his visor dampening the bright sunshine. His heavy boots were sinking slightly into the ground, causing him to constantly have to reposition his feet. Me neither. Still, better than just sticking around back at base, getting yelled at by Sergeant Brills. Elliot narrowed his eyes. Hills, Sergeant Hills, right? The sun beat down heavily upon the pair as they moved onward, barely bothering to check their surroundings. The landscape was almost completely flat. Not a single inkling any in sight apart from a cluster of curved dunes lying in the distance. Some guys were telling me about out here. Elliot spoke up. What did they say, eh? It was some weird conspiracy theory kind of story. Allegedly, the army developed some weird cyber robot thing trying to make the ultimate soldier. Like in the movies, the thing they said it was like a synth from Fallout, exposed wires, metal plating, in the shape of a human. Right? Yeah, go on. So they made the frame and the consciousness of the thing, and they wanted to give it emotions as a test before they gave it organs and such, to try and make it as close to a human as they could, so it would blend in. They also gave it a bunch of special abilities, like superpowers. Nobody knew what kind of powers, but there were a lot of suggestions from everyone. Stuff like laser vision and secret machine guns hidden in its arms. Sounds like a load of shit to me. Soldiers are always making up stuff to entertain themselves, yeah. But here's the thing. When they gave it emotions, they went too far. Ended up making it too real. So it didn't want to fight and tough. It just wanted a normal life. And before they could disassemble it and start over again, it ran off into the desert. Some of the guys said they saw it the other day, moping around in its metal frame. Hey, maybe we can catch a glimpse. Make this deployment useful. Let's head over to the dunes. There might be a few targets camping there. Nodding, Elliot walked calmly by Roger's side, noting an increasingly ominous feeling as the dunes moved closer. They were mostly smooth and curvy, with some large chunks of rock scattered around. Poking up from the sand, Roger headed up to the top of one of the slopes, staring out across the horizon. In his curiousness, it took a few seconds of adjustment before Ellie's eyes could make out anything. The cavern walls were covered in bizarre etchings stretching out across the ceiling. Strange footprints were etched in the sand where Elliot's boots lay, not like that of another soldier or animal. Elliot traced his hand across the marks. The longer he looked, the more similar they looked to words or phrases. He could just make one of them out. Lonely, so lonely. Taking a step back, Elliot gasped, frantical. Why, glancing around the walls once more, it was the same message, carved everywhere it would fit. Lonely, so lonely. Elliot rushed out of the cavern, the previous sense of dread now encompassing his entire body. Roger's arms were twitching slightly, his face pointed upwards to the sky. The skin from his legs began to peel back, exposing a chrome-colored surface. Within a few seconds, Roger's body had shed like snakeskin, his uniform dropping to the sand, and standing in Roger's place, a grayish android, the sunshine beaming off its polished torso. Why did I even try? The robot's voice was slightly metallic, like a monotone text-to-speech engine. Elliot's mouth drooped open in shock. Roger had a family. I could feel his memory of them in the back of my consciousness. It's a side effect of the process. In taking over a body, I gain access to their memories. Roger had a wife and a kid. Another feeling I'll never truly know. The android continued. The saggy mound of Roger's wilted flesh rolled slowly down the slope, piling up at Elliot's feet. Elliot felt as if he would vomit. I can only host the appearance of a body on. See, it's dead. That's how I was programmed. It was an infiltration tactic by my designers. I guess it did work after all. Roger was dead before you were even deployed with him. I found him alone in the desert, sturdy, separated from the other soldiers. He was a goner anyways, I suppose. dying of heat stroke and dehydration. Still doesn't make me feel better. There was a long pause. The wind began to whistle through the dunes. I just wanted to pretend I was human, pretend I had friends, connections, people to talk to and listen to. There's nothing to do, no one to talk to out here. They hurt me, Elliot. They broke me apart and built me up again time after time, until they got me just right. The scientists, the doctors. I can never go back. I'd be scrap for par. Tease. Elliot aimed his rifle directly at the android, emptying his entire magazine into the creature. The deafening sounds of gunshots echoed through the desert, carrying on for miles. I'm bulletproof. Go ahead, kill me. The android's weary voice continued. You aren't the first to try. Bullets bounced off the machine's metal plating like hail off a car windshield. Exasperated, Elliot pointed his weapon down, staring blankly at Rogers. Remains, he was my friend. Think yourself lucky for what you had, as the joy of friendship is unknown to me. Elliot scowled. What are you? What the fuck even are you? The machine turned to face Elliot, exposing its bulbous, robotic eyes. Its face was expressionless, unable to convey even a single emotion. You really have no idea, don't you? You're barely less of a machine than I am. Want me to show you? Slowly, the robot stepped over a piece of Roger's uniform. Its movements were janky and unnatural, a quiet whir escaping its body every time it took a step. Before Elliot had a chance to react, it had snatched a handgun from the sand and shot a bullet straight through Elliot's temple. Elliot stumbled, head backwards, collapsing face first onto a rock. Stunned, Elliot gradually pushed himself back onto his feet. He was alive, reaching a shaky hand to his head. He could feel the sparkling wires poking out from his skin where the bullet had gone through. On the side where the bullet left, he felt a large computer chip embedded within him. A mechanical voice echoed through his head. Structural damage detected. Repairing wounds. A surge of unimaginable pain built up rapidly in Elliot's temple. He screamed violently, a gush of blood flowing down his face. The opening was burning itself shut, the broken skin fixing itself back together on both ends. Elliot gritted his teeth on the verge of tears. A few more seconds passed, and the injury had completely healed. You're a prototype, like some of the others. I could tell by the glint in your eye. All prototypes have the glint. You're part human, part machine, Elliot. Roger wasn't a prototype. But I reckon he would have become one eventually, had he survived a few more weeks at base. What the fuck did they do to me? Elliot panted, his hands clutched onto either sides of his head. What they're going to do to everyone. Why make one ultimate soldier when you can make millions through the miracle of cybernetics? Of course, you aren't meant to find out. There is a device in your head that deletes the memory of seeing the wires and computer chips if you get injured in the field. It works for seeing other people's injuries, too. I just shot straight through it. If I had shot you in the leg, you'd have forgotten there was any injury at all by now. Elliot fumbled around with his holster, eventually pulling out a ridge knife from his waist. With little hesitation, he stabbed the knife deep into his arm, ripping open the flesh like paper. A series of flashing lights and green cards exposed themselves, coated in a slimy layer of broken skin. Elliot hopped to his knees, crying out once more in agony. What a.m.? I in a psychotic rage. Elliot dropped the knife and began to rip out the hardware, tossing it carelessly through the air. Metal wiring and rugged chips flew out of his forearm, scattering onto the sand. Soon only an empty space was left, devoid of bone or muscle. Kill me, Elliot begged the Rob, OT, groveling at its metallic feet. No, you aren't the first to ask, it answered, looking down upon Elliot with pity. Jabbering insanely, Elliot leapt off the top of the slope, landing on his neck. With a savage crunch, the robot gazed down at his broken body as the sand and the wind slowly piled on top of the soldier, the desert swallowing him whole. Story 5. Keep walking. The first thing you need to remember is to never turn around. If you turn around, you're dead. It had been a long day at the office, taking calls from China, sorting through endless stacks of paper, dozing off with my elbows on my clear glass desk. Definitely time for coffee. I sat up from my new wooden chair feeling stiff. The office lounge was a floor up, and as I walked through the hallways I became increasingly awed that I was the only one left, other than the janitor, whose vacuum I could hear far off down another long hallway. The elevator was shut down for the night to save power, which was when I realized it was past midnight, so I headed for the staircase on the opposite side of the building. The first indication is silence, palpable and thick. Sipping on my coffee, I became increasingly awed of the silence. The city never sleeps, and I know that on my drive home I will still get caught up in the bright lights and taxi cabs. But in that small, pale blue room with granite countertops and a fridge, which even then was devoid of a buzz, was supremely silent. It was crushing and deafening, and only split open by the small sound of my careful slurps of coffee. Feeling uncomfortable immersed in it, I finally decided to take the cup to go and head back to my office, where I would switch on some internet radio and finish signing contracts for some $100,000 company transaction. The janitor was gone about 20 minutes into my work, but I knew that through the web of security cameras there was a room where two fat men with bags of chips were watching my nightly progress and conversing about their wives or the latest Playboy centerfold, or maybe even both. Then you began to feel anxious. The city was as bright as ever that night, and even at 1 a.m. people lined the city streets between bars and clubs. My phone rings. It's my wife. Hello? There's no response, just a burst of static and feedback. At the next stoplight I decide to send her a text. Hey babe, 20 minutes out. Love you lots. I look up. Where am I? The streets, which were once familiar, had become a maze of cement and steel, a forest in which I was hopelessly lost. My pulse quickens and my hair stands on end. I keep driving. It gets warmer in my car, and the space on the back of my neck begins to itch. I think I'm breaking out on my cheeks. I pull up to another stoplight and decide to check my sanity. I pull down the mirror and see my red face beating up with sweat. I wiped it on my sleeve and gaze into my eyes, which are elated and darting in place. Soon things just change. I flip the mirror back up, and now I'm in an industrial and very unfamiliar part of town. It's like blacking out, except when I think about it, the memories are vivid. Every right and left turn, every light, every face on the side of the road. God, it must be a trend today with the younger generation. All their faces seem so similar in memory, and the black clothing blends together until a single black suit covers them all in the pictures in my head. God, I'm so fucking lost in this city. I decided to pull over and ask for directions next to a small cafe up ahead. I pull up to the curb and get out, but I notice that the cafe isn't as crowded as I thought it was. In fact, it's quite empty. But no matter, I thought. I would just walk down the road till I found some young suited to ask for directions. But as crowded as it was up to this point, I can't find anyone. My phone buzzes. I look down. My phone never buzzed. I'm now somewhere on the edge of town. Now I am panicking because I remember so vividly the faces, so many faces, and the turns, and the walking, and the soreness in my bones because I had come so far. The street lights here are dimmer, and trees are beginning to creep up behind the buildings. Don't look back. I turn in my confusion, and I see all those faces, but they aren't many. They are one face, one lanky man in a suit, with arms reaching down to its knees, which already seem 4 feet off the ground. His fingers twinge, and the shadows of them stretch across asphalt toward me, and as they doctor or closer, the street lights get darker and then are gone. I turn to run. Now I am in the sea, a sea of trees, green and moving, but making no noise at all. Not a single rustle of leaves stir, the wind or a twig snap under my feet. Just a small drum beat getting faster and faster as I walk. No run through the trees. He is everywhere. Where the fuck am I? Where is he? I can feel him looking at me from every single direction, but he is swallowed by the darkness, and all I can hear is my heart beating and the hum of the wine as it passes through the hair by my ear. I keep telling myself to never look back, never even hesitate. Keep moving. Then I fall and I'm face down in a pile of twigs. He is on top of me. I can feel his cool breath on the back of my neck. But I have to keep running. I can't resign and I can't look back. I can't take in what's fast on my heels because I know I can't fight. Soon you will find the messages. I'm losing my breath. My lungs are bleeding, I could swear it, and my heart was becoming less of a drum beat and more of a vibration in my chest. That's when I noticed the warm wetness on my arm, and there, inscribed in my forearm, ND burning. Keep running. I remember writing it. I remember seeing him in the woods ahead and frantically riding it with the twig I grabbed earlier. When I fell, I remember how excruciating the pain was as the twig splintered in my skin and the blood poured from my veins. Don't get cornered. Up ahead, there's a building. I can make it there. I can do it. It's not too far off, and there is a dim light emanating from the doorway in its side. I use the last bit of my energy to get there, praying that someone else will be there. Someone human, because he was everywhere, chasing me silently. Why? Suddenly breathing on my neck, then suddenly 2 feet to my right or my left. I finally broke into the doorway, but quickly realized nothing in this building makes sense. It's a 2-sided maze of corridors which are completely empty, and the sound of my breathing echoes into both of them. I'm faced with a decision to go right or left for my salvation. But before I can decide, I am quickly hobbling left. The totems, they move. The corridor is narrow and pale blue with tile lining parts of the walls. It twists and turns endlessly, and things are making less and less sense. And here the air is even thicker than outside, and the smell is near. Teetred in some places, I think I could hear rats scurrying in the shadows where the lights don't reach. I see a small wooden chair, a bit out of place, and it looks antique and clean, contrasting with the overall dinginess of the labyrinth. It is just about a perfect chair except for one small detail, an S painted roughly in black on its stool. He's still behind me, his lanky arms reaching for Emmy. I look down at my bleeding wrist, and the message still reads clearly, "Keep running." Soon I reach an off stretch where the lights are dim and stop at the end in an odd rectangular room. I'm cornered. I'm alone with him. I buckle at the knees, staring at the dead end, and begin to claw my way into the farthest corner. Tears stream down my face, and I make the mistake of blinking them away, for when I look up again, it is before me. That antique chair with the black S sits in the corner of the room. The last thing you had to know is that there is no escape. You must give in. You must give yourself over in resignation. If you don't, the nightmare will continue, and the blue walls will swallow you up. I'm broken and hopeless. My bleeding arm is wrapped around the back of the stool while my body slumps over onto the ground. A familiar nose enters the room. It's the same feedback from the phone when I thought my wife called, except my wife never called me, and my phone never rang. It was him. It was always him. All those people were him. The janitor was him. This coffee lounge was him, this room is him, and THIS chair, the same chair in my office, is him. He is everywhere. He is divine. He is reaching down for me now. My eyes are moving up to him now. He is breathing on me now. I'm staring at him now. He has no eyes, but I feel him glaring. No nose, but I can tell he is sniffing. No mouth, but I know he is screaming. He is like staring into a black hole. He almost seems to rip a wall. Why, your soul, he is nothing, but everything. There and not. And there is only one thing I can say clearly about him without a doubt. He is very tall and very slender. Story 6, A Dream Come True. Ema. Giant the multiverse. Atoms converging into patterns infinite. Most universes listening to physics, placing only that which should exist into reality. But there are others in which the impossible happens simply because there's no reason it is not. All the darkest horrors of the grimmest imaginations, made real with naught more than a vast cosmic whim. It is a night like any other, and the Stevens are a family like any other, sleeping in a house like any other, a house containing young boys' room like any other. Little Howie Stevens was always an imaginative young boy. His room reflects such small glow-in-the-dark stars coat the ceiling and offer dismal green light to a room otherwise blanketed in black. By this light, one might see the blue walls with thin, vertical white stripes. Simple white carpet supports a dresser of neatly organized clothes, as well as chest of toes ordered with far less finesse. The half-open closet, the lamp slumbering on the dresser, and the door shut firmly. This view in all its underspoken peace would be decidedly picturesque, but for the one small discrepancy. Young Stevens is not sleeping peacefully. No, he is quite awake, and with no intention of rectifying this. He is afraid, you see. He is afraid because little Howie Stevens in pajamas, broadcasting his interest in small insects, sees monsters in the night, not ones in the closet or under his bed at 7. He is too old for such childish fears. He sees them on the very floor before him, fading silently into existence, Kung-fu, said and purposeless before blinking away to nothingness. Once more they don't notice how, and for weeks he was not sure they were appearing at all. A trick of the light or a dream creeping into conscious thought, haunting his waking hours too, but each time they've stayed for longer, not much. So incremental were the changes that he had no reason to notice them at all until the monsters began to stay for seconds at a time, long enough to notice their surroundings. He has seen monsters for almost a month's time, not every night, but every night where he lay awake past 11. Not until the second week had he seen clearly the otherworldly beast, abominably fat, squat hind legs, a slimy lizard's tail wagging in the night, all dyed as red as the stones of hell. Once he saw it, the image was forever burned into his eyes like spots of colored light, ready to present itself whenever he blinked, whenever he slept, whenever he dared to let his mind wander. Last week was the worst. The monster had finally turned around to see him. At first, the monster's bulging eyes, dripping teeth, and questioning snout flashed astonishment at this young boy's presence. The next night, this emotion was replaced with another. Hunger, and delight. The last few days, Howie did not sleep, would not sleep. He stayed each time the monster whipped about and charged young Howe, lunging to claim his meal, but always vanishing as the boy winced to meet his doom. Afterwards he would scream, and his parents would come to save their boy from a would-be criminal, only to find him sobbing in solitude. "What's wrong, sweetie?" his mother asks, sitting down to offer a protective embrace. There's monsters. There was a monster right there, and it keeps coming and then disappearing, and now it wants to eat me. He trails off into sobs as he awaits his parents' fear-wrought plan of defense. "They won't come," his father flashed his mom an askew glance and sits next to his son. "Howie, do you know what Daddy does? A scientist? A physicist?" He corrects proudly. "I study everything that is possible in this world, and even some things that are impossible. But if there is one thing I can tell you with absolute confidence, it's that there was no monster in this room. If there was, we would see evidence of it." How it came and left, exasperated. Young Howie retorts, "It appeared, and then it just disappeared." "Son, as a physicist, I assure you teleportation is thus far impossible." Then he adds matter-of-factly, "I think you just had a bad dream, but that's what I thought at first, too." He thirsts to make his parents understand, but it kept happening for like 2 weeks, and then last week it saw me, and he cuts off, distracted by his mother's reaction. She's suddenly fraught with worrying. At last, he thinks. At last she understands. But it's no comprehension that has created her worrying, but its lack. She looks with despair to her husband, but he waves away her concerns with a reassuring head gesture, and then turns to his son. "Son, I think you're exaggerating. I promise there is no monster. You can sleep in our bed this one night, but for the rest of this week, I expect to hear no more screaming about these nightmares." How he wanted to argue, but he was so tired, and his parents' bed seemed so safe, and he trusted his father's words, though his reason yelled to the contrary. The next night, and how he dared not sleep, he sat huddled against the wall, sobbing silently into his pillow, determined to stay up the whole night and proved to himself the monster was not real. It was 11:34, and this time Howie Smee led the creature's hot breath as the wide jaws attempted to close around the young bull. If it had only been half a second faster, the blade-like fangs would have pierced Howie's soft flesh, and the monster would have tasted the blood it so violently craved. The pillow muffled the young boy's screams, and then contained his sobs as he cried himself to sleep, determined not to displease his father. He knew tonight could be his final moments of life. His mother expressed worry when her perpetually starving young boy pushed aside his dinner with a forlorn "I'm not hungry," but her response was only to suggest he go to bed early if he were not feeling well. He solemnly agreed, only coming back out to sneak away with the biggest knife he could find. He hardly dared to blink. He stared at the digital clock numbers, a clown-like, mocking red as it slowly counted down his remaining minutes on Earth. It always happened at about 11:30. He didn't know exactly, but he was determined that it should not happen as he turned away. He wouldn't sleep until then. It was 10 now. It's 11:32. He jolts to alertness, perhaps in fear of his imminent demise, perhaps in rage that he let his guard down, perhaps because he thought he might have missed it and find himself forced to endure such hell another night. Whatever the reason, Howie Stephen Scree is dragging his parents from kindred dreams into his own personal nightmare. Howie's parents come in with the same urgent rush as before, but as the father looks upon his whimpering boy, his worrying hardens, and he prepares in his head a lengthy speech about the boy who cried wolf and telling lies, and about how Howie ought to be brave like his father. He sits down next to his boy, his mother already frantically stroking the child, and waits for the child's frightened eyes to meet his. He is determined to be gentle this one last time, but this is it. Never again after this. The father is right on the last note, but the speech never comes to pass, nor does the opportunity for gentleness ever arise, because unbeknownst to all but one of the Stevens the monster of a far-off dimension had been prepared for its own recurring fantasy, in which a young meal was but a single dive away. It prepared itself for the moment of transition, and as the tingle that marked the beginning of a random cross-dimensional journey through space-time, the monster did not make note of its victim as it bore down its destructive knife-like teeth into the flesh of some writhing prey. Food burst merrily into its mouth, and when it sensed the presence of another, more aggressive being, the beast drove its fangs into that one as well, and felt its own home fade into meaning around it as the taste of foreign meat became only a treasured memory, nursed by a tongue-licking crimson nectar from long teeth. Far, far away, all Howie could do was howl in despair. "Tears are you," neighing as warm as the blood that covered him, pouring from his parents' wounds, pouring onto the chrome tool he thought could be his only lifeline. He would cry all night, loud and constant enough to warrant a disgruntled neighbor's complaint to the police. Howie thought perhaps this was his salvation. The bite marks would be the proof he needed to be safe between howls of pain. He tried to explain about the monster. It was a certainly tragic tale the boy wove, but who could believe the words of a child when the wounds of the parents appeared so knife-like, when a suitable blue, tea-stained blade was found clutched in the hand of that very child, when all signs of the monster had vanished as if it had never existed? Certainly not the state-ordered psychiatric specialist who aptly hid the sedative to young Howie, who could no longer find any peace in the night. The doctor could only pray miserably that his words would break through to the poor 10-year-old boy, and shouted, "There is no such thing as monsters. There is no such thing as monsters." Young Howie thought he heard his father shouting these words from across a great distance, and although he knew he was in now and far too old to believe in monsters, he swore he would never stop believing that somewhere the monster was still out there, searching for Howie, getting inches closer every day. He swore it because the only thing worse than believing that the monster was coming to find him was believing the doctors and the judge that the monster was inside him and that it was coming for everyone else until Howie was left all alone, whimpering into the night. Story 7. The Bicycle's Trip. It was a beautiful morning when I woke up that day. The sky was clear and the weather was perfect. It had been a hot summer, much more so than usual, and I, like so many other residents of my town, had decided the best place to be was inside an air-conditioned room. It was around midday when I decided to go out for a bike ride. It had been a long, cold winter, and I had sworn to myself that when summertime came I would make the most of it. I decided to act upon that promise. I forced myself to put down the book that I was reading. I was just pages away from finishing it, but I desired to do something else, something new. I told myself that these solemn, inactive activities were to be best left to days not as fine as this, and so I set off for a bike ride. I had purchased a new bicycle a couple of years before, and since that time it had mostly rested indoors, much like me. The bike was a reproduction of a vintage model made before my time, and its rustic appearance had stroked my interest. When I had got outside, I noticed that the morning's bow tie had been replaced by cloudy skies. It was not a matter of significance to my determined mind, as I had a craving that could only be satisfied by the fine-looking burgundy-colored bicycle stored in the back of my garage. I took the bike down my driveway and past the forested area that surrounded my isolated house in the countryside. The wind shook my hair and blew my clothes against me as I rode on the hill towards the town beneath the mountainside. I had walked down this road many times in the past, and had even biked down it before when I had first bought the bicycle 2 years ago. I reckoned the ride would take me less than 15 minutes. I coasted down the hill, managing the curve in the road with controlled braking. Geese called above me as I rode past the cliff to my right. From atop the mountain I could see the clusters of houses and buildings which formed the town at the bottom of the valley. It was an incredible sight on a summer's day such as this, and I was only interrupted from its beauty by the sudden drops of rain upon my body. I watched the water seep into my clothes before my vision was contorted into a series of blurred images. As sent forward from the blow, something had struck my bike from behind and thrown me from my seat. My mind didn't have time to process what had happened, and I was barely able to react. Washington's falling, and I instinctively raised my arms ahead of me to break my fall and keep my face from hitting the concrete. My body hit the pavement, and I was tossed into a roll down the steep mountain road. My hands, legs, and arms drew blood when scraped against the rough pavement. I rolled for what seemed like miles before I stopped. My mind felt fuzzy, but I remained conscious, and after a few brief moments of confusion I managed to summarize what had happened in my mind. I realized that I had been hit by something, a vehicle of some kind, and had been thrown to where I was from the collision. As I was sitting there, for the first time since the accident, I felt the unbearable pain from the scrapes on my blooded body. When I opened my eyes and looked up, all that I could see was darkness. It had been midday when I started my bike ride, and I couldn't comprehend how nighttime had fallen so quickly. The country sky, which was normally packed with the bright lights from the heavens, was devoid of any such light, not even the moon. Living in this part of the country, I had had my fair share of eerie outdoorsman experiences, the kind you would tell around a campfire over a couple of beers, but those stories paled in comparison to this. My confusion was broke from the surges of pain as they shot through my body. I could not see anything in the pitch black around me, but I could vividly feel the stinging pain. My shirt and shorts had protected my body to some degree, but I felt most of it as being bruised and blooded. I remembered memories from my childhood then, experiences of being lost and alone in the woods around my house, and those painful memories of fear and helplessness surrounded me like they had once before. I knew this area off by heart, yet in the darkness I could sense nothing familiar. I was sitting in the fetal position, fearful of the dark abyss which had surrounded me, and scared of causing myself more pain through movement. I could not see, but I knew I had to do something, anything I needed to find help. The town below had a local clinic, but it was miles down the road. I knew it would be faster to walk to my home. I had a first aid kit there. My hands and legs burned in excruciating pain as I tried to push myself up onto my feet, and my right leg buckled under my weight before I could do so, sending me falling back onto the ground. My hands burned at whatever they touched, and I could not feel whatever it was they fell upon. I couldn't feel anything besides the raindrops which poured down upon my agonizing face. I was at my limit, and I broke down into tears. I cried so hard that my sobs replaced my agony with silence. I called for help, knowing no one was there to hear me, but my voice was caught within my throat. I tried to scream, but could produce no sound. When I moved my hands to my throat to coax the voice from my breath, I found I could not do so. I could not express my agony through words, and so I pounded the ground in frustration. My foolish actions were met with pain, and pain only, and it was then that I discovered I could not hear it too. I was deaf, blind, and crippled, and my body panicked at the thoughts as ran through me. My mind processed a life of nothingness and immobility, and those thoughts of helplessness set my mind into a state of terror. My sanity returned when I saw the hope which was a light at the bottom of the hill. My pupils retracted, and my eyes struggled to focus the image of blurry light in front of me. I was relieved that I could see something, anything. The light grew closer and brighter as it advanced upon me, its faint gleam growing slowly taller to reveal the blurry image amongst its dim yellow glow. The image before he was a person, what I had believed to be an angel. However, that thought was soon erased from my mind as I comprehended the horrible image in front of me. A pair of grotesque, horribly mangled legs limited towards me, and blood lurched from the being's legs as it stalked its way to my direction. I blinked when I saw this, not wanting to believe what I had just seen. but the image was still before my eyes, and shaking body, the figure slowly revealed itself from the darkness. As it grew nearer, I could see more blood, more gore, and for the first time in my life I experienced absolute terror. I tried to get up, to run, but I could not muster the strength to do so. My outstretched hands tried to pull my body back away from the body of pulsing blood and guts that was coming towards me, but I could not do so, and that helplessness was what drove me from my sanity. As the body drew closer, the light revealed the figure's torso and lower chest. The horrible figure wore a tattered and bloody white dress which was draped upon its bony and pale body. The sound of static accompanied by falling rain flowed into my eardrums as the now headless figure limped towards me. I was shaking uncontrollably in terror as the body's face was unveiled from the blackness, and I felt the splash of rain brought from the figure's step in front of me as I caught a glimpse of the pale face and piercing blue eyes of the monster. I closed my eyes then, unable to bear seeing these last few moments of my life. Cold hands tightened around my shoulders before I opened my eyes from the grasp of Titan. Hands. As my eyelid crawled back, I saw a flashlight shining into my eyes and the face of a paramedic behind it. I felt the rain fall upon me as I was lifted from the ground and placed gingerly into a stretcher. I could hear the raindrops hit the pavement around me and the static of a paramedic's radio as he spoke into it. After weeks in the hospital, I was finally released. I had a friend drive me home after I had been discharged, and when I arrived back home, he presented me with the bicycle I had lost in the accident. He told me he went to retrieve it after he had heard what happened, as he thought I would want it returned. He said apart from the scratches, the bike still seemed to be in good condition, but what couldn't seem to get off was a pair of small handprints on the right side of the bike's frame. They seemed to have been stained on with some sort of chemical, and that he had found it this way, and he found the bike near the edge of the cliff, where the girl who fell to her death 10 years ago had supposedly fallen from.